Hello and welcome to the Keyboard Chronicles, a podcast for keyboard players. I'm your host, David Holloway, and I'm thrilled as always to be here with you. I've just gotten off a brilliant chat with Mr. Patrick Warren. As you'll hear when we talk to Patrick, he's had an extensive career both in live performance and studio recording, as well as a burgeoning TV scoring and composition and arrangement career. As we always say, it's hard to not just scratch the surface with guests like Patrick, but we've certainly given it our best shot, and there's lots of fascinating insights into both sort of the live touring, recording and composition genres. Some great anecdotes involving people as wide as Diana Krall to Bob Dylan to performing at the White House to Aimee Mann, Michael Penn, you name it, we've covered it. So I think you'll enjoy it a great deal, and I'll talk to you at the end of the show. Patrick, it's an honour and a privilege, sir. It's so lovely to see you. Are you keeping warm over there on that chilly Wednesday afternoon?
We have some lovely rain, which makes me very happy as we're in desperate need of it.
Yes, I've heard that. No, look, absolute pleasure to have you on. So I thought we're going to cover quite a bit of ground during this interview, but I thought we'd start off just even with your 2024. So I said in the introduction before the show that you're incredibly busy and incredibly prolific. So just taking, not even counting your film and TV composition, which we're going to cover, but just in 2024 alone, you've worked with Mike Campbell and the Dirty Knobs, Avril Lavigne, Andrea Bocelli, Bruce Springsteen, and I've left out about 4 or 5. Number one, how do you keep up that pace? And number two, tell us about what the highlights of the past year have been for you.
Okay. Well, the pace seems to be easy enough. What I did was I built a studio in my backyard. So I no longer have a backyard, but it's just an easy walk with a cup of coffee across the threshold, and then I'm good to go. And it's nice and quiet in here. So I seem to be able to get a lot done at different hours between naps.
Yeah, naps are important.
Naps are important, but yeah, it's been a blast working with Mike Campbell. I just finished another song with him last week. He's unbelievably brilliant songwriter. I had no idea what a great songwriter and lyricist he was. So that's been an absolute treat. And we have a big project coming up that I'm not allowed to speak about, but.
No, that's amazing. And you raise a good point there, Patrick. So your backyard studio. So a lot of your work, like most composers, arrangers and so on now, you're tending to do a lot of remote work. So you're working on tracks that are sent through rather than being in the studio with a whole bunch of other people.
That seems to be the MO these days. And you have to sort of build a trust with the various producers. After a while, they get to know you and then they just send you a song and say, do your thing. And they don't care what you, but there's always that initial period. If they don't know you, like, well, they'll suggest some part and it'll not be right, so you have to just override it anyway.
Yeah, that's right. Do you miss the older approach to recording?
More than I can possibly say. All the best things I've ever done have been done in that format, mostly with T-Bone Burnett and Joe Henry, who always record as an ensemble live without click, and you're always going to get something special during those moments.
Yeah,
provided you don't drink too much of the wine. That's usually.
That's always a good tip. Regular listeners and viewers of the podcast know that I'm absolutely a Springsteen tragic. So what involvement did you have on the Best of Springsteen album?
I've done a couple of things with Springsteen, not recently, but I worked with Brendan O'Brien many years ago on some Michael Penn records. So that's the connection. And I just get funny calls out of the blue for him, like, come in here, play piano on this or Chamberlain on that, or bring some weird sounds. And Brendan is one of those guys that has enough energy to power a city. You have to, the pace, and we do it in the studio with him, but the pace is mind-numbing sometimes. So
I can imagine, he's a powerhouse. No, that's wonderful. So I thought, that's, as I said, that was just the last year, but let's just take a bit of a step back. So what was your musical upbringing, Patrick, as far as a child and teenager that led you to developing a career in music?
Well, like any child or many children, my mother forced me to take piano lessons since the age of 6 or 7, I can't remember, pretty young age, which I hated. And I had to practice 30 minutes a day. So I had a sand timer that she would put on, and we would put it up, and I would practice my Mozart for 10 minutes. I'd flip it over so the same 10 minutes would go backwards. So I was really only doing 20 minutes. But it wasn't until around the age of, I say 13 or 14, when my mother said, all right, you're old enough to make your own decisions. You can quit. Then I started thinking about whether or not I wanted to actually continue this. And about the same time I was thinking about that, I was hearing Joe Cocker, Leon Russell, and all these kinds of things. I'm like, oh my God, I can't play guitar, but I can play piano. Maybe like any kid, I could be in a rock band. Then I started to practice more diligently and whatnot. A lot of that part's a blank, but I eventually, as an older person, ended up at Cal Arts as a piano performance major and also took some composition classes there. And then, very long story short, and then out of Cal Arts, I met Michael Penn, a great songwriter, Sean Penn's brother, and that was sort of my first professional gig, and then sort of snowballed from there.
And I was going to ask you about that. So obviously that was a hugely successful first gig. I mean, Michael Penn had a number of great hits, and he certainly resonated even down here in Australia. And obviously, as part of the research, I noted in your acting credits were obviously his mega hit, No Myth, and you were in the clip. So you even had your acting appearance there. And the first thing that jumped out at me, Patrick, is you don't look a lot different. Sure, the hair's a bit grey, but basically you don't look a lot different.
Thank you kindly.
And the other thing is, I assume it wasn't a Chamberlain you're playing. What was the instrument you were playing in that clip? I was fascinated by what it was.
That is a Chamberlain.
Oh, it was?
Yeah, and we often, because the inside was so strange looking, we often would take the lid off.
Gotcha.
And I had a penchant for there's a huge, we call it the flywheel, but what it is essentially is a giant capstan sideways across many rolls of tape. And I tended to use it as a sort of I don't know what you call it, a whammy bar. All you could do is slow it down. You can't speed it up, but you could swoop into notes and stuff like that. So I was always messing with that thing. So we just took the lid off and I used it that way often.
Yeah. So let's talk about, we might as well talk about the Chamberlain now. So I know I don't think it's fair to just say it's a precursor to the Mellotron because there's so much more than that. But tell us about the Chamberlain and how you initially, sort of discovered it and developed a relationship with it where you're now considered, sort of one of the subject matter experts on the instrument.
Well, I had heard of Chamberlains when I was in high school in the early 70s, and I'd always dreamed of one. And they had Mellotrons at the old guitar centers back then, but Chamberlain I heard was the thing. So when I met 100 years later, I met Michael Penn. He had one, and he had it sort of enshrined on a shelf, like a temple. And I said, well, what's that? He goes, it's a Chamberlain, but we don't play that. It was too valuable. And finally, one day we were working on a song. I talked him into bringing it down. He and I both realized immediately the connection with his music and me personally with the instrument. I'd always dreamed of being able to play orchestral sounds with a keyboard, from a very young age. And here it was. Samplers hadn't been invented yet. So I next thing you know, I'm playing it on all his music. And then I bought 4 more because you could get them back then. I just had Chamberlains all over the damn place. And they just kind of snowballed from there. I ended up on can't remember the order of things, but it ended up putting it all over a Fiona Apple record and an Aimee Mann records and Macy Gray. And I don't remember the order of all the events, but I kept getting calls like, I want that sound on my record. So
that's amazing. And how many do you own now, Patrick?
I think I'm down to 2. I don't like to take them out anymore. I don't like to look at them. I've put them on too many records.
And are there many people around that maintain them anymore, Patrick? Because I can imagine that's a challenge as far as maintenance.
It is a challenge. Back in the day, the inventor of the Chamberlain, who actually is the inventor of the Mellotron, Harry Chamberlain, he invented tape keyboard instruments. He lived in Upland, California, which is an hour and a half due east of me. So I would often visit him and he would make me tapes. And they were built by his children. So Richard Chamberlain had a garage with all the parts and we would often work on those instruments. And I learned a lot about the maintenance on them. They're really contraptions. The motors are literally from refrigerators. And all the parts are like motorcycle bushings. It's a hodgepodge of parts that somehow works, but they do need to be tweaked and maintained, and they love to be played. The less you play them, the more upset they get when you start them up again.
Which sounds like a refrigerator. That sounds like a refrigerator, Patrick.
Yes.
Yeah.
The belts go bad, and we're always looking for new belts. So, but I got really good at maintaining them over the years. I toured with him for, oh my God, almost 10 years. I just dragged him around, often 2 at a time, so I could leapfrog him from gig to gig and whatnot.
Well, because they'd be quite weighty, wouldn't they?
Oh, yeah. I used to know the exact weight.
Heavy enough.
They're not light.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously working with Michael Penn, and I'm also keen to talk about Aimee Mann in a second, but what was the next sort of significant gig for you after or in parallel with Michael Penn that got you really established in the industry?
I think it was probably the first Fiona Apple record. It was obviously a very big record. Mm. And I believe that's the next big thing that happened, if I remember the correct order of things. But I would say that record. But I was at some point on tour with Michael. He had met Aimee, and they had become a couple. So I ended up playing on a lot of Aimee's things and touring with her frequently back in the day. But that was more like family, so I don't remember.
And I'm as much an Aimee Mann fan as I'm a Bruce Springsteen fan. So, I mean, I'd love to talk a little bit about your work with her. I consider her, alongside Michael as well, obviously, but her as one of the greatest songwriters of the 80s, 90s, and through to today. She's just amazing and still prolific. What sort of adjustments did you have to make as a player to work with her, or it was a fairly easy relationship from the start?
Not much. The interesting thing about her, she's obviously one of my favorite songwriters of all time. The interesting thing about Aimee is that I can go further outside the lines, almost on the border of absurd sounds, and they don't sound absurd in her songs. It works so beautifully. It's the sort of sarcastic strangeness. I don't have the right adjective for what's happening, but I listen, everything from a melodica to just the craziest sound, and it absolutely works in her songs, and I don't know why. So it's always an adventure recording. I mean, we did Bachelor number 2, a record that I really love, and we were sort of channeling Burt Bacharach records at the time, and just putting on strange Burt Bacharach parts, and it was just working so beautifully. I have no idea why.
Yeah, I think sarcastic strangeness is the perfect encapsulation of Aimee's whole genre. I think that's perfect. She should release an album called that.
Yeah.
I think that's amazing. No, thank you for that, Patrick. And because you've worked with so many artists, and I'm keen to get onto the other aspects of your career, I'm just going to throw some names at you, and if anything jumps out as being memorable, and I'm also going to ask you at the end of this section just to tell us about artists that are memorable to you, if I haven't already called them out.
Sure.
So Tom Waits, obviously an icon. Tell us about any involvement there.
That was sort of a dream come true. I've been an absolute Waits fanatic for a very long time. I think oddly, the first record I ever heard was Frank's Wild Years. And to this day, it's one of my favorite records of all time. But long story short, he called me, I don't know, sometime, and he was going on a tour and he wanted help with a sampler. He wanted to use a sampler. And so I set him up with some of my sounds. I said, don't share these. These are really cool sounds, but they're fine for you. And him not remembering that called me many years later for the Glitter and Doom tour. I think the last tour he did in maybe 2008, I want to say. And I got a call from management saying, Tom Waits, and would you be interested? And I said, I pretty much drop anything I'm doing. And they said, great. So they talked about an audition. Tom called me, talked to me on the phone. We were just sharing stories, and I knew I still had to audition for him. He hung up, then he called me back 3 minutes later and said, the gig's yours. So whatever I said on the phone seemed to indicate the right thing for him. So that was an absolute revelation how he works. Some things he does are so spontaneous and so fast that your head is spinning. And other times he's so attuned to what he needs. I need a church bell, and I have 15 church bells, and I'll play him. No, not that one. No, not that. No, not that one. And he'll get the one that he wants, and it's just a certain sound that he heard in his head, and he'll get after it, and I'll find it for him. So that the tour, although it was a short tour, I think, I can't remember, it was 8 weeks or too much or something, but it was just, and because we learned his whole catalog, almost 60 songs or something like that. Not his catalog's much larger, but we learned some 60 odd songs, and his wife would shuffle the cards every night and pick out a set list. And I would frantically, I had little cards. I couldn't remember every key of every song. So. I
was going to ask you, so that 8-week tour, and you mentioned that you toured with Michael Penn as well, just how has touring treated you? So is it something you enjoy doing? And I know we quite often talk to artists that as you get older, it gets harder too. There's no doubt about that. But what were the things you learnt from touring that you enjoyed and maybe not so much?
Well, touring is that, you have 1-2 hours of this great energy on stage, and then for the next 24 hours, you're basically a UPS package, just getting shipped somewhere. You can only read so many books on a bus. I'm not a big drinker, so I have beer, like, I'm going to bed with my books. But as you get older, especially, because I toured, I think, all the way up to about 2014, camaraderie becomes really important, almost as important as musicianship. And so there's not a person I've toured with that doesn't feel like family at some point, unless something went wrong. But mostly everybody I know, when you see them again, even though it's been 10 years, it's just like you were on the bus yesterday or something. So, and I do love it. I do miss it. But then often when I'm out, I'm like, oh God, why did I do this? Why am I doing this?
Exactly. No, I'm hearing you. And another name to throw at you, Patrick, Bonnie Raitt.
Yes, I did a lovely record with her. Joe produced, Joe Henry, and he had for about 10 years a beautiful studio in South Pass that was in the basement floor of a historical landmark house. It was, I think, President Garfield's widow's house or something. He built the studio, and it was an absolutely lovely experience, and frightening also, because she has her regular band, and part of the record was going to be a regular band, but here I am playing with her for the first time, and she's a monster musician. But I think what we did came out really beautifully, and I'm proud of it. So, and Joe's brilliant producer, and it was all very, very live. No, obviously, because it's a show, no click, no nothing, just go for it.
Yeah, that's right. And maybe it's worth talking a little bit about Joe Henry, because you have worked with him quite extensively. So tell us about that relationship there, and as you said, that more live feel and your work with him.
Joe's basically like a brother to me. He's just one of the most wonderful human beings I've ever known. And after, much like working with Michael Penn, when you work with somebody for 10 or so years, it becomes very instinctual. And so certain songs I would record or play with him, even though there's no meter or no time, I can just hear the intake and the breath, and I know when to come down on the piano. And he guides the ship beautifully and encourages me to reach for things that I would normally had not reached for. And that's always a really good thing when you feel you have that freedom to reach out to something special like that.
Yeah, that's great. And the last name I want to throw you is more of a complete unknown, Bob Dylan.
That was one of those wild calls. First you get the call, like somebody's going to call you and it's important, so pick up the phone. Then it's Bob's manager, and he says, Bob's making a Christmas record, and he wants you to come in. He says, and he explained, you might be there for an hour, you might be there for a week. And I totally understood. I said, I got nothing. Don't worry if he kicks me out. If he doesn't vibe with somebody, I'm sure I have nothing. I won't no upset on it. I understand. So I walked into this session, and he had to spin it. And the first thing he said was, I don't want you to play the sustain pedal at all. No sustain pedal.
Oh, wow.
Like, yes, sir. And the next question within 2 seconds is, do you know anybody that can sing like the Andrews Sisters? And without a hesitation, I said, yes, sir, I have them here tomorrow. Because I'm in LA. I can find that.
Yeah.
I didn't even think it twice about it. I made two calls, and I had them there the next day. And these singers, a duo called the Diddy Bops and another great singer, Nicole. Anyway, they all came in, and they just sang their ass off beautifully around the mic. He's all around one mic, and he's blowing smoke in their face with a cigarette, and they don't care because it's freaking Bob Dylan's. And from there, I was in for the rest of the weeks. I understood his pacing. He doesn't linger on anything. And we had a moment when he wanted somebody to sing with the Louvin brothers, so he brought in some male choirs, and they were fussing, and they were looking at charts and like, well, you sing the D flat and you sing the F natural. And I could see he's about to drop this whole idea. So I walked over to him. I said, you guys got about 30 seconds to get your shit together. He's on to the next song. And immediately they did, and understood what I was saying. So I think I understood how to read him pretty fast. And he's absolutely brilliant. And his call, like no sustain pedal, was actually a great call for the record.
And I think that ability to read people, Patrick, and it's obvious you have that skill. And when we move on to the film and TV, I suppose it's being able to read cues as well, as far as from what you're seeing, being able to read how you translate that musically. So obviously that's a skill that's paid off.
Yes, I don't know where I got it from, but
Just take it. Just take it. And so the last part of this section I wanted to ask you, Patrick, is there someone that stood out from the vast amount of people you've worked with in that sort of recording and live and touring part that has really stood out to you as a highlight, if it's possible to pick one?
Oh, that's very, very tough. The Tom Waits tour I did was hands down my favorite tour of all time, touring wise. No question about it. I was stretching my abilities to the max, and every song is like you're going in a different room. So the whole color palette would change every song, and the energy. He doesn't have a rehearsed mode. He is full on, just belting it like he's on a record every moment. So you're in the front row, and there was the elements of theater. We had Kathleen and was working with directors to create this beautiful set, lighting and everything. So the audience is just like batshit crazy, of course. So that was touring wise. Record wise, it's more like moments, favorite things I've done that I'm proud of. I wrote a string arrangement for Lana Del Rey on a song called Honeymoon, and I was really proud of the way that came out. That's just one of it. I did some beautiful work for Common that I'm very, very proud of, and things like that, but it's too many to figure out. I couldn't really figure out a record that was.
Yeah. And we're going to talk about, I think we'll mention Common and Allison stuff in a little while as well. No, so Thank you for that. That's absolutely brilliant. And I think it was with Bob. Did you do a White House gig? And the reason I ask is just in the last 24 hours, I've had another guest, Mo Pleasure, who played at the White House for the Obamas. So I just thought it was funny that you've also done a White House gig, I believe.
Oh yeah, that was interesting. I forgot about this. So after we had done the Christmas record, he was asked by Obama to come play, and Obama wanted him to do Chimes of Freedom.
Oh yeah.
So he asked if I could do an arrangement. So I met him in his little apartment in LA, and we went over the song. And the first thing Bob said was, "I think more people know Times They Are Changing." I said, "My unborn child knows that song." So he wanted to do that song. So Bob played on the piano. I brought a little keyboard, and I sort of recorded the MIDI of how he kind of was hearing it. And from there, I created a very simple, waltzy little arrangement that he liked. But I said, if I write this out and the White House band plays it, if you get lost, they're gonna plow through. They're not gonna follow you. Say yes if I wanted to do it. Like, well, sure. So off we went. And at the White House, Bob doesn't do the press meet and greet stuff. So we didn't really meet anybody. He just went up there and he played, and then we walked down and shook Obama's hand, and it was over, and so fast. But the interesting after thing was he was so delighted with doing it that way that he had the idea and said that he wanted to do a record of just piano and him of the hits. So we had a few weekends where we got together and went through songs, and I thought to myself, this is maybe the worst idea ever, or maybe a good idea. I might go down as just the worst person in history if this record comes out. But fortunately, he went on to other things. I don't know that anybody needs to hear piano versions of songs.
So it'll be sitting in that vast Dylan archive. It'll see the light of day one day, unless he
nothing got
burns it all.
recorded, but it was just an interesting thought that he had.
That's funny. No, I appreciate it. So, and I definitely want to cover your amazing film and TV career as an arranger and composer. So I thought we'd start off, Patrick, what was your first sort of involvement in that side of music? What was your first gig as an arranger or composer?
My first gigs were as arrangers. At some point, I don't remember. Oh, I do remember the record. I think it was very simple arrangement for Jacob Dylan's version of Heroes. And I had a Chamberlain part or something I played, and they said, could you do it for real strings? And I'd never done it. It's before they had MIDI. So I penciled it out as best I could and trying to count the bars on it. And so that was my first. And all I'm doing is just the simplest. I think we're just echoing the vocals that were there or something. I can't remember. It's a dumb arrangement. But from there, I started being asked if I could take Chamberlain parts and put them into real strings. And that's sort of how I got started arranging and learned. There's a million things to know. You can never know even a tenth of what you need to know about arranging or orchestration or something like that. And then, but I always wanted to do film, and I did little bits and pieces of it with friends of mine. And it was a very slow climb to getting busier with it. It didn't happen overnight. I didn't get any big things overnight. Mostly the bigger things came from working with T-Bone and Burnett, and also with Common. And those are some of the bigger gigs I got. But it just, at one point, I was on tour with Diana Krall, and we were doing True Detective, the first installment of that show. And I loved it because that every night in the hotel I was writing and sending it back, or every day in the hotel, and then doing the shows at night. So I was very much not bored on tour because I had so much to do. I wasn't singing any of the cities or anything, but I was very busy sending stuff back.
And that one, Patrick, so that the first series was the one with McConaughey and Harrelson?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah, look, and I no word of a lie, not realizing you're involved in that. Some of the music in that, it just totally grabbed me from the get-go. That series is one of my favorite series of all time. It's just, the music is amazing.
Thank you. Yeah, it's very dark.
Yeah, it's very dark. Yeah, I love it. I actually haven't watched any of the other seasons. That's the only one I've watched, but I do. And so just before we leave arranging, so what has changed over the years with arranging as far as the process? And I suppose scoring and composition is the same as far as it feels like compared to live touring and recording in a studio, that the actual scoring process hasn't changed radically. Sure, the software's gotten better if you're using software, but has broadly the process pretty much remained the same?
I think so. I mean, the advent of software has really changed the game for a person like myself, who I don't hear in my head how a flute and oboe were going to mix, but I can put it up there and listen and say, like, maybe I like that better in octaves or sixths or just unisons. And because the libraries are pretty good these days, you're going to get a fairly accurate representation of what's about to happen with a live orchestra. I mean, if they're willing to play for a live orchestra. So from that point of view, it's been very helpful. When it comes to larger full orchestra stuff, I usually work with orchestrators because the time limit is crunch. And some of them are very more like copyists, like just but some of them are offer ideas. And I love when that happens too. Like, have you thought about doing this or doing that? But it's, the software really has been a game changer for doing that kind of thing, because I wouldn't know that, oh God, really that, yeah, I know it now, but like a bassoon gets louder as it goes down, where a clarinet gets quieter as it goes down, and vice versa as they both go up. You need to know these things as you're writing. They're all important things to know. So.
And does the software tend to guide that a little bit? Now, obviously, the software knows the general ranges of orchestral instruments and so on. Does it tend to know some of those idiosyncrasies of the instruments now? Has it evolved to that stage, or you need to manually factor that in?
Well, because they're all chromatic recordings of real instruments, you'll hear it right away. You'll hear that this bassoon gets kind of fat and honky down there, and it's very beautiful up there, but it's not very loud. Well, that's going to be accurate. That's going to be accurate to you could turn it up, but you can't turn it up in the orchestra. So that's right. It is the volume it works at. And also with strings, I took some orchestration and arranging classes. There's some basics that you should know. But even those things all those rules are meant to be broken. But start out knowing the basics, and then from there, stretch it.
And it sounds like some of your key outputs in composition and arranging have been collaboration. So you've mentioned Common, you mentioned T-Bone, Burnett. What is the approach at the start of a project? So let's use Alison. I assume that's what you're talking about when you work with Common. Tell us about how that collaboration worked from the start of the project to completion.
Common is one of my favorite producers of all time. He just creates an atmosphere of joy and love in the studio like none other that I've ever experienced in my life, which really creates a sort of a willingness on the part of players to just go for something they wouldn't normally go for. We'll often have 7 players in a room at the same time, but when it comes to arranging, he no notes, and he would send me these beautiful songs. And even though part of them might be a rap and part might be melody, I treat the whole thing as just like a standard American songbook kind of thing. I just think he's such a great lyricist. And I was free to go way outside the lines. I think on a record, Black America Again, I was just almost in Prokofiev land with some of my lines. And he loved him. He has really, really beautiful ears, and he's very attuned to it. And anytime I get to work with him is just always an absolute thrill.
Yeah, I do need to check out more of his work. I'm embarrassed to admit, Patrick, that I was unaware of Common as a musician. I actually discovered him watching the Apple TV series Silo and loved his acting, and then suddenly realised he was a musician. So I discovered him in reverse. But yeah, love what I've heard.
Yeah, the first thing I did with him was with John Legend. I did the arrangement for the song "Glory" for the Selma movie, and that song won him an Oscar. John Legend, and it was not it wasn't a great arrangement. It was just a very functional arrangement, but it was the right arrangement for the song. And it was Common's idea to throw out the drums and just have the whole thing be driven by an orchestra. So it was a fun challenge, and it worked really, really beautiful song that they wrote.
And the other thing I want to ask you as a composer and working in film and TV is that relationship with obviously the director, and directors vary in how strongly they feel about musical cues and the music overall. Just tell us about how you've evolved managing that relationship with directors where it needs to be managed.
That's a different kind of a thing that you have to be willing to do as a composer, and you're gonna throw out a lot of your best work, and you have to be willing to just not even think twice about it, because they're going to have a vision, and often they're not exactly sure what it is. They'll talk more in terms of this character we have stakes here. They're also in love and they're just realizing it, but they'll talk about the scene rather than what the music should be. And then you have to interpret from that. I need to get some stakes in here, a little bit of romance, and mix it together somehow, figure that out. And sometimes just the most nondescript cue, like a scene in a diner where two people are talking, is extremely important to the director. And I'll do 8 completely different versions of the same cue willingly, like that's your job, and we'll find it together. At other times, it's just I hit it the first time, and then of course every director varies. And some directors are new; they've been given a show, they're not exactly sure what they're allowed to do and not do, or what the show is even about. Sometimes, or some showrunners don't know, like, what's this? What am I doing here? And other times the showrunner is also the writer and the director, and so they know exactly where the ship is going. And it's a process I absolutely love. I throwing out stuff and chasing after stuff, because inevitably that we'll get something better, even though it's hard as fuck all. But excuse my French.
No, that's okay. No, I think that's a fascinating insight. And for those of us that don't work in film composition or TV composition nowadays, and I understand it's probably changed a little bit over the years, but nowadays, how much of the scenes are you getting? Are you getting pretty much the whole show now to score to, or are you still only getting snippets and having to work from there?
We get the whole show as an episode. And mostly I work on series TV. So the episodes come out every week or maybe every other week, and you get a locked cut, meaning what you think it means. It's not to be changed. Then you get locked cut 2, locked cut 3, locked cut 3.5.
Wow.
And that's a disaster, because you will have written the fight scene that's got all these hits and beats and everything's perfect, and you've timed it out, and you've got the orchestration and the tempo map is done, and they cut out like a second, and like the whole thing just wait.
Oh no. What's driving that, Patrick? I assume it's not just your work. What's driving the changes to the lock cut? What other factors what other parts of the production are causing that?
Sometimes it's latent notes from the network saying, make this shorter, make this longer, or cut this out. Sometimes it's just a director looking at it, saying, I need to make this a little bit better, or something like that. I'm never sure quite what the motivations are, but they're there, and they cut it. But generally, what you hope for is a locked cut, and then it'll usually have temp music in it. Not always, but most of the time. And there's always the spotting session where you're basically discussing, do you like this direction of this temp? Should it come in sooner or later? Should we connect these two cues together? Things like that. You'll have a discussion. And it's very important you take meticulous notes, because you'll forget it.
Yeah. And how much lead time do you get paid? So as a general rule, I understand it'll vary widely, but generally when you receive that first lock cut to when you've submitted the final product for a network or series streaming TV show, how much time do you usually have per episode?
I would say, like, if the thing is on schedule, you'd have 3, maybe 4 days to write the episode on the outside. In the case of a show where I have an orchestra that I need to get parts to, that can even be down to 2.5 days of just frantic writing. And then, because I got to get it to the copyist, and they have to print it and all this, and get sessions scheduled, and that can be really nerve wracking. So.
So what's a normal day in those 3 or 4 days? How many hours are we talking in a day? And there probably isn't a normal day, but what's your approach on one of those busy days?
I do my best work in the morning. So my approach is to start, 9 or 10 o'clock and work till, 1 or so. But if I hit a wall, I've learned the best thing to do is just take a nap or step away, because you can struggle with the cue for 2 hours. Or you can just rest your brain, come back, and it'll be written in 5 minutes. It'll all occur to you. And that's taken me a long time to learn that, because it's scary when you're like, I have to have this tomorrow. Just take a beat. It'll come to you. So, the first 2 or 3 notes are always the hardest notes. Like, what is this scene? Is it a cello? Is it a drum? Is it a percussion? Is it just a eerie pad? What is this? I don't know. I'll have a template of 50 or 60 sounds, and I'll try them all just to see if anything connects me emotionally with what I'm seeing on the screen. I tend to write with the dialogue up very loud and the sound up very loud, because I consider that part of the arrangement, if you would.
Makes sense. And what software do you use, Patrick? What's your go-to software when you're doing this?
It's all Logic for me.
Okay, yeah. Okay.
That's the only one I've ever learned.
I love Logic. Big Logic fan here. No, that's great. And have you ever had, I understand in TV and film that the director is the director and they are the boss, but have you ever had any fundamental disagreements? I assume you always, as composer, need to step back and accept the director's decision, but have you ever had any, without naming names, any serious creative differences in that sort of?
For sure. Common was an executive producer on a show called The Chi, which was about coming of age in Chicago. And I did the first 3 seasons. And the initial showrunner, a lovely guy, said something odd to me. He said, I don't like percussion. Okay. And I didn't know what that meant. And then this is like my first big job where I'm all by myself. I'm not with anybody else on this. And so I hear a lot of percussion. It's serious. And so but he said, he kind of gently said, but I can be convinced. And I just started writing what I heard, and it seemed to go very well. But there was they bumped on anytime I would put emotional content, like a note or a, major seventh, or they'd be like, whoa, with the notes, Mr. Stravinsky there, like just the pad, so that was that. And then on the 3rd season, the actual person who created the show, Lena Waithe, stepped in and said, I hear piano, jazz piano, and trumpet. And that's what I'd heard from day one.
There you go.
And I was like, yes. And they thought I would be upset. Like, no, this is what I've been hearing on the show forever. So from there, it became very easy. And then somebody took over after that, Wyclef, I think. But that was season 3 for me was a really fun season. I got together with the jazz trumpet player. We just had an absolute blast writing stuff for it.
And just broadly, again, for those that don't work in the industry, and I'm not sure whether it's changed over the years, I'm assuming it's I'm not sure what the right terminology is. Like, you're hired to do the work, the rights revert to, I assume, the creator of the show, and that you're essentially paid to do the creation, or do you retain any rights? I have no idea what this answer is, sorry.
Most of the time you don't retain any rights. I mean, you have the 50% of the writing royalty or whatever, but they own They own all the music.
Yeah.
If you're a big time composer and they want you, you could probably work out a thing like, well, we don't have any money up front, but I'll take the publishing and that kind of thing. But I'm not definitely not that guy. So.
No, that's good. Thank you. Any particular sessions that have stood out to you, as I said, as being particularly memorable, or other directors or musicians you would love to work with in the sort of TV genre that are on your bucket list?
There's so many TV shows now that are there's just too many. It's more like show oriented. I don't even know who's the directors are anymore. There's too many to follow.
Yeah.
I mean, the really famous ones, they already have their own.
That's right.
Yeah, they're going to be reaching for the top A-list composers, but there's genres of TV that I absolutely love. I mean, I love sci-fi and I love dark sort of dramas and stuff like that. Which always, I think my orchestrator said, "God, Patrick, this is some of the darkest fucking music I've ever heard of. You're the sweetest guy. Like, I don't understand what's happening." I do like writing that kind of stuff, but I'm happy to write for comedies too, or anything really.
Yeah.
So
And I mean, I've been really pleased in recent months, sort of TV composition coming out in social media a lot more. And one of the drivers of that is obviously that amazing TV show Severance. Yeah. And the composer on Severance. Now it's incredibly, well, I shouldn't say it's incredibly simple. It's probably not, but just, it's a beautiful piece of writing for that show. And it's shining the spotlight a lot on people like yourself and the amazing work they do, which I'm just really thrilled to see.
Yeah, that's the music on that show is super beautiful. I forget the composer. I started that series. Yeah, they haven't. I'm somewhere in the middle of it, and then went somewhere else on another series.
Yeah, highly recommend season 2. It's amazing. Yeah. No, thank you for that. And across all of this, we've obviously talked about the Chamberlain a lot, but both in the TV work and also the recording work, are there keyboards over the years that you've grown to love aside from the Chamberlain, or even what you're currently using now?
Well, I obviously love any kind of Wurlitzer. I have too many of them. For some reason, I wanted a red top Wurlitzer, even though I have a black top Wurlitzer. And so I brought one home, and my wife said, "Oh, so this one sounds different." And I said, "No." And I said, "This one's red." And she said, "But it sounds different, right?" And I said, "No." She just couldn't understand.
You're amongst friends here, Patrick. We all get that.
So I love things. I love things like that when I can drag them out in B3s and real instruments, which it's not very often you can take those out anymore unless you're on a very big tour. So I generally just rely on my laptop, and I have a massive collection of sounds I've made over the last 30 years. I've yet to find a keyboard that I love to trigger them. Right now I'm using I'm using a strange, cheap little Roland RD88.
Oh, yeah.
Only because I love the action matches most of the piano sounds for whatever reason. And I've never used any sound inside of it, but it works as a trigger for me. It's lightweight and carry it to small shows and whatnot. And, ship it ahead of time.
It'd be remiss of me to ask, given all the work you do, and understand some of its secret sauce we won't go into, but are there string and piano libraries that you use that, are staples of what you do, even if you are tweaking the sounds?
For sure. I lately I've been relying heavily, for whatever reason, I'm not sure, on Spitfire stuff, but I tend to get into it very deeply, and I tend to write MIDI controllers for all the different things it can do. For just simple arranging, often they have a chamber ensemble, and then they upgraded it and it was worse, so I just use the original one, and I use their solo strings sometimes for quartet arranging. I used to use LA scoring strings a lot. I think that's actual sound on Honeymoon, the Lana Del Rey arrangement. We had the budget to use a real orchestra, but she liked the sound of what I did with the, but I mainly lean for film scoring and whatnot on that thing. And then some of the Berlin stuff for whatever, percussion and harps and timpani and stuff like that.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. No, thank you. And we have some standard questions, Patrick, and one of them is where something's gone spectacularly wrong. So whether it's on the road or in the studio or wherever you'd like it to be, where it's been an absolute train wreck, but you can look back and hopefully laugh about it.
I think I have 2 of those that I remember. Great. The one was with Waits, where I was so tired. I don't remember what happened. I was exhausted, and I got on stage, and I have all the cards, and we got the set list, and I'm up there, and there's 2 songs that have big piano intros. I think, if I remember correctly, it's like maybe Falling Down and something about Come Up to the House or something. And one is a waltz, and one is not. And I think it was Come Up to the House, which is in 4. And I just started it as a waltz. Started it, and nobody came in. And I turned around, and Waits looking at me, and everybody's looking at me. I'm like, started again as a waltz. And everybody's just looking at me, and then they just started it as a waltz. And I immediately realized, oh my God. And so that was the longest 3 minutes of my life. Tom tried to sing Falling Down. Falling Down. He asked me what happened. I just said battle fatigue.
That's amazing. I've never had one like that before. That's great. Love it.
So I'll never forget that. I think once with Aimee Mann, the Chamberlain has to have shore power. It can't be plugged into because it runs at 60 hertz. So even a little off, like a big generator, you're going to get different notes, same as a B3. And so they had promised me that I was plugged into shore power, and then big Lilith Fair. It's just Aimee, myself, and one other musician. And Song starts and she just turns around, in front of 6,000 people, says, normally he's a good player. I'm not sure what's happening.
Nice.
I said, shore power.
Yeah.
They got it together about 5 minutes delay.
That's funny. Good ones. Thank you, Patrick. Another one we ask people is to tag a keyboard player. So is there someone else you've run across in your career that you think you've thought, gee, I'd like to find out more about their life story in music?
Oh gosh, I don't know. That I tend to gravitate towards individual performances of things, like from a young age. The first time I heard Stay With Me, Ian McLaughlin, just that sound, that way he made a Wurlitzer sound, I'm chasing to this day. I cannot figure out how he made it sound so brilliant, and his playing on so many records, just lovely. Rick Wakeman, things like that. But I've been all over the map in my life. One minute I'm when a kid, I'm like Tony Banks, and next minute it's Chicory, and then I don't really know. But now I'm just absolutely fascinated by any jazz players. After having toured with Dana Kroll, my mind is kind of blown how brilliant they are. Even people in my neighborhood.
Yeah, there's so much talent out there, agree. Yeah. And then we have the dreaded Desert Island Discs question, Patrick. So if you have to pick 5 albums, what would they be?
I'm going to go with Hunky Dory was a really important record to me growing up. It was on vinyl, and I wore it down to the nub.
Amazing.
Several times. I've become obsessed with a record lately that I've discovered, which is Nancy and Lee. It's Lee Hazelwood and Nancy Sinatra did this record, I guess in the 60s. I'm not sure of the date. I think Billy Strange is the arranger. And it's sort of psychedelic cowboy, and I've just become obsessed with this record. Like the arranging on it is, every time I listen to it, I hear something new. The arranging is just haunting. And that's one that I wouldn't mind hearing. I think I would probably pick something like Beethoven's Ninth, like the Leonard Bernstein version, just to have one of those. Frank's Wild Years, probably, just because it meant so much to me. And then maybe I'm not picturing myself really stuck on a desert island, maybe freewheeling Bob Dylan or something like that. Just nice. Just seems like a thing I'd want to hear as I'm dying.
Exactly. Well, and I can honestly say after 140 episodes, Patrick, you've picked 5 originals. No one else has picked any of those 5. So there you go.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So no, thank you. And then to round out, we have what's called our quick fire 10. So 10 short questions with 10 hopefully short answers.
Yes, sir.
So first album you recall hearing that made an impact on you?
But God, so it would be like from a 3-year-old. I mean, like Daniel Boone was a man. Like just whatever kids. Actually, I would say the one that had the most impact would be Harry Belafonte, because my dad was playing it all the time along with mariachi music, and that definitely got in my DNA. So those.
Yeah. Classic. Yeah, no, absolutely. Before a gig, what do you like to do to feel settled? So what's your most important pre-gig ritual?
Not to drink for me. I'll have a glass of wine after, but if I even have a sip of wine or something, I can't. It's not that I can't play. I'm gonna hit the wrong patch, and a flute's gonna come out where a tuba should, or a tuba's gonna come out. I'm gonna do something stupid every time. So I don't drink before the show.
Great call. If you hadn't been a musician, what do you think your career choice would have been?
Well, I was a medical tech for 7-8 years, and I enjoyed that. I knew that the odds of making a living in music were rough, so I had my own company doing medical work, which I enjoyed. I did brainwave tests mobily around hundreds of hospitals.
Wow. Yeah,
mobile diagnostics,
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. Yeah. Favorite tour you've ever done?
Waits, hands down.
Yeah, sorry,
sure.
That's No, favorite gig you've ever done, if that's possible?
Oh, I can't think of a specific. Oh, I guess just recently, I wrote 3 arrangements for a Guatemalan singer, Gaby Moreno, dear friend of mine, performed by the National Symphony Orchestra 3 or 4 years ago. Under Ben Folds is a consultant, and he does this thing called Declassified, where he brings in artists and arrangers, puts them together, and then presents it with a full orchestra. And then you also get to then the audience also hears classical music. So that was a really hearing my arrangement, which I was very proud of. Song called Till Waking Light, and watching her sing it with her mother there, was very proud. It was really a moment.
Oh, that is a moment. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah. Do you have a favorite city that you've played in?
Yes, 2. It's a cross between New Orleans and Seattle, strangely, my 2 favorite cities.
No, that's great picks.
Couldn't tell you why.
No, that's fine. Name a song that you used to love, but through either recording or touring, you've played it to death now, and you probably happily never play it again.
I don't think I have any song that I'm sure there's probably one, but I'm not thinking of it off the top of my head. There's some that are like, oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, it'd probably be a song that I didn't love in the first place.
That's right.
Like that.
Exactly. Do you have a favorite music documentary or movie, Patrick, that you've enjoyed over the years?
God, I've seen so many, and now that I'm drawing a blank on that question. So, favorite documentary music?
Spinal Tap usually rates up there.
Well, you can't beat that, really. Mighty Wind or anything in that genre. So, I mean, I tend to not love documentaries I love documentaries, but not recreations of, like
Rocket Man or Bohemian Rhapsody.
That kind of stuff. I tend to just shy away from them. So.
No, I agree. Name one thing you'd like to see invented that make your life as a keyboard player or composer easier.
Just somebody please invent a good controller. There's just none.
Yeah.
Nothing. That's that much. Just a simple, great weighted controller. I don't need any stupid sounds in it. I just need to be quality. Then nobody seems to want to do that.
No. And then last but not least, your favorite non-musical activity or hobby. So what keeps you sane outside of music?
Hiking a lot. I do a lot of hiking in the mountains. I just got back from Bellingham where I spent a couple of days hiking up all over the beautiful. That really tends to refresh my brain.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's safe to say, Patrick, you've you climb mountains to get out of music, but you've climbed some massive mountains as a musician, composer, and arranger too. And it's been an honor talking with you, even just on a little bit of that. It's hard to emphasize how much broader your career is than what we've chatted on, but I super appreciate what we have covered.
Oh, I appreciate being invited. Thank you so very kindly.
And there we have it. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Patrick. What a lovely guy. And wow, some of those experiences, they're unforgettable. So no, hugely appreciate Patrick's time. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope you did as well, particularly for those of us that don't have the luck or, well, in Patrick's case, skill to work in those sort of arranging and composition areas. It's just fascinating to get a bit of an insight into all of that as well. So no, thank you to Patrick, and thank you to all of you out there for listening, and definitely thank you to our gold and silver supporters as well. So Dave Bryce and the team at the musicplayer.com forums, we hugely appreciate your support. The lovely Tammy Catcher at Tammy's Musical Stew, a long-time supporter as well. Thank you, Tammy. Mr. Dewey Evans from the sunny land of Wales. Thank you, sir, for your ongoing support. And last but not least, Mr. Mike Wilcox from Midnight Mastering. If you're actually creating your own stuff and want a great mixer and masterer, then Mike is the guy. So midnightmastering.com. Thank you all again for listening. We're always keen to hear from you. Do drop us a line on editor@keyboardchronicles.com. We're on all the socials, and always lovely to hear from you. So thank you again. And until next time, keep on playing.